Hello, everybody. Welcome to this week's belated edition of Daily Coastal Brief. It's our weekly show about politics, and Carrie, I think we're in this middle of the celebration. I've got 2.5 hours of sleep last night, and yet I'm
You
running
look
on
great,
adrenaline.
Marcus.
I
You look
am
great.
running
I'm doing
100% adrenaline.
for our podcast listeners at some point. I'm doing jazz hands right now. Jazzy. All right, sorry. Go ahead.
So, as you may know, Democrats had a remarkable election night on Tuesday. That was the general prevailing narrative. We're going to be talking about that extensively in today's episode. But the prevailing narrative was that Democrats were going to get blown out of the water because history says that the party in power loses a lot of seats, an average about 30 House seats. And it does so because, one, the election is a referendum on the incumbent. And so a president can never really fulfill their campaign promises, right? I mean, they promise the world, and they run in Congress, they run into the Supreme Court, nothing ever happens. So the supporters of the president are disenchanted, they're disengaged. On the other hand, the opposition is just absolutely revved up, right? Because they feel marginalized. And Carrie, we've been talking for over a year now how this was not going to be a typical midterm. We saw this coming from a year ago, and we really want to shout this from the rooftops because we saw this coming, and it was clear as day that you cannot have a referendum on an incumbent president when the old guy Donald Trump won't get off the stage. So already we were saying this was going not to be a referendum, but it was going to be a choice, just like 2020. It was going to be a choice between Trump and Biden. And that was a different equation. Doesn't matter how unpopular Biden is, because Trump is even more unpopular than Biden. And two, we saw what the Supreme Court was going to do with Roe v. Wade. We saw the writing on the wall. And we knew, right, Carrie? Like, we knew that there was no way that women were going to lose this right. And not to mention, So Carrie, like, I know I've set this up. This is sort of the big picture setup. And Democrats won. We may still lose control of the Senate, the House, but if we do, it'll be by 1 seat, 2 seats. This was not the blowout wave election that we see in midterm elections. And we picked up state legislatures in Minnesota and in Michigan and in Pennsylvania. And we passed 4 or 5 ballot initiatives that protect the right to abortion and governorships. We protected governors, Secretary of State's offices. It was a great freaking night.
Yeah, we want to gush about this because it's so exciting. But let's take a step back here real quick and just say, so as my understanding of where we are, and I honestly have been writing and haven't had a chance to do the last minute check, but my understanding of where we are is that we look like we're potentially and have a decent shot, Marcos, of keeping the Senate, right? We won the John Fetterman, who, even amid having a stroke, put together an amazing campaign, won against, Trump endorsed Mehmet Oz in Pennsylvania. That was an insurance policy against losing in somewhere like Nevada or Georgia or Arizona. Right now, it looks like I think we have a decent chance in Arizona. You can correct me if I'm wrong.
I think we're going to win Arizona. We're going to win Nevada. I think
Nevada's still counting, but it looks like Catherine Cortez Masto. Okay, he's. You heard it right here. Marcos is calling it.
I'm calling it. I've looked at the numbers and the people who know what's going on, and there could be a surprise. Right. There could be
a surprise, but it looks very good.
Yeah.
What that means is even
and then the runoff in Georgia. Were you going to mention?
Yeah, right. In Georgia, do we know for sure we're going to a runoff? Likely, we're going to a runoff.
It's been called for a runoff. Yes.
Okay. So in Georgia, we're going to a runoff, but it's probably not going to be for control of the Senate. It's probably going to be, we're going to go into that with Democrats controlling the Senate, and hopefully, I don't want to jinx us, and then Georgia will be icing on the cake, hopefully, if we can keep, Democrat incumbent Raphael Warnock in there. And then we would end up with 51 seats. So that's about where we are in the Senate. In the House, it's much more murky. There's a lot of things still yet to be counted and called and whatever. Marcos, what do you think the odds are right now of Democrats keeping the House, losing it by less than 10 seats, that type of thing? Any idea?
Yeah. If I would have to guess, I would say that the Republicans end up with about 220 seats. So they would have a very narrow. What is that? A
That's
three,
a
five.
That's
Yeah,
a
it would be
two-seat majority.
It would be
You
very,
have to have
very, very narrow, and it's well within the margin of votes are being counted, and there are races that are hundreds of votes apart, and so we may still hold out. And this is a topic for a different episode, but I actually do wonder if having the narrowest Republican majority in the House, having them eat each other alive because
it's gonna be sheer chaos.
may actually help us in 2024 because they will still pass some nutty ass legislation, and then Joe Biden and the Democrats could then run against the Republican
And
House.
the only thing they're going to be able to agree on is doing investigation after investigation after investigation. And guess what? Voters are going to find out that they have no plans to do anything about inflation or anything else. So. So
and we've learned from Republicans that they can subpoena whoever they want. We don't even have to show up.
Yeah,
I mean that's
exactly.
what we learned the last couple of years.
So and then in terms of gubernatorial races, it looks like what's happening with Arizona? What's happening with Arizona? Do you know?
Arizona's tight. We don't know, and that's one I'm not really willing to count. Right now, it looks like we may lose Nevada. We did pick up Maryland and Massachusetts, so we would end the night +1. But very, very importantly, we will have kept Wisconsin,
Michigan,
Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania.
So which are three critical swing states in the Midwest that always play and have been extremely close in both of the last presidential elections. It was, that's huge for us. So, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and we kept the control of the electoral machinery in those states, and it looks like we also won the Secretary of State office in Arizona, which also administers the elections in Arizona. So Arizona, I'm hopeful that we sweep, that we win the governorship, and it's still well within the possibility. It's just we just don't know what votes are outstanding, so it's kind of hard to say what kind of margins we're going to have at the end of the day. But it's looking, it's a bummer that we may have probably lost the Nevada governor's seat. Again, we don't really know what's outstanding, so it's not a done deal. But all in all, it was on the governor's side, we won some of the most important seats, and we actually picked up seats. And again, this was supposed to be the red wave, the red tsunami.
Yeah.
And so, now that we've sort of talked about sort of this top line, Carrie, I loved your piece today. You wrote a piece on Daily Kos about that media narrative. And I know it's been a theme of yours for months, and it's definitely been a theme on this show, right? We had people on like Simon Rosenberg, who is now like a mini Twitter celebrity because he was one of those people who everybody piled on top and claimed that he was selling hopium because he kept saying guys, I don't see a wave. The data doesn't show a wave. And so people kept piling on to him because he seemed to be out on the ledge. We had him on the show. Same with Joe Trippi. We've been talking not because we stuck our heads in the sand and we were going to cheerlead no matter what. We're not that type of people, but because we kept looking at the data and the special election results, and we kept wondering what is going on here, to the point where you had the New York Times ignoring their own polls because the narrative was so overpowering. So Carrie, you really, really drilled into those guys today. So I'd like you to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So I just want to, look, I've spent over 2 decades as a journalist, right? And so I am not the most eager person to be journalists suck. I think it's important that we have good journalism, right? The DC, there's something very broken right now about the DC press corps. This is probably not going to be news to anyone who actually tuned in live or is listening to this podcast later, that the DC press corps is broken, but it is. And I was not sort of an eager media scold in this whole thing, but I just could not believe the flood of stories about, that where Democrats were scrambling. They were getting into defensive posture. They were
a reckoning.
Yeah, it was going to be a reckoning, a shellacking. there was quote unquote fresh new evidence that, from the polling that showed that that Democrats were completely competitive, and in fact winning 3 out of 4 swing states that had just been polled. But the New York Times framed that as fresh new evidence that Republicans were going to take control of the House, that the red wave was coming. I mean, it was just relentless, and I couldn't believe it. So in the final 2 weeks or 3 weeks of this, which I totally,
by the way,
yeah,
those 4 polls in that New York Times story, that was fresh evidence of the Democratic challenges. Democrats won all 4 of those races. Just as their polling said.
Just asterisk, we won. Okay, so so anyway, I just I spent the last 3 weeks basically of the midterm writing piece after piece debunking this. And I wasn't saying I know Democrats are going to win. That's not what I was saying. What I was saying was there isn't any data to fuel this narrative. There isn't a foundational set of data that say this is true, okay, other than vibes. And there is historical precedent, but it was clear that we're living in very ahistorical times. And what I said in my piece was, look, I mean, I was happy to say I don't know for sure what's going to happen, but I don't think what we're looking at data-wise it says what all of these Beltway pundits and journalists and analysts are telling us is going to happen. And if they had shown just the same shred of humility and the same sort of rigor in trying to adhere to the facts and saying, well, there's sort of countervailing type atmosphere here. There's the economy pulling us this way, but there's abortion pulling us this way. And the whole idea, I just have to say, I was flabbergasted by the whole idea toward the end that some 50% of the population had been declared second-class citizens with no bodily autonomy. And everyone was like, yeah, they're going to forget by November that they're second-class citizens. I mean, I just couldn't. I studied a movement for a decade, the LGBTQ movement. And if there's one thing Beltway journalists and pundits do not understand, it is movements for freedom. It is freedom movements, legitimate grassroots movements. And they totally missed it and underestimated it. And it was driven by men. And there were plenty of women who bought into it inside the Beltway. Sorry, go ahead, Marcos.
Oh, don't apologize. I was just so what you're saying is that the salience of abortion didn't fade in scare quotes. They kept saying it has faded, as though they're like, I wanted abortion rights 2 months ago, but
why?
Gas prices are too high.
The best, the most, what can I say? The most gracious explanation, okay, I can give to that is that they had this completely sophomoric reading of the polls. And when a majority of people said inflation and the economy are a big issue for me or a top issue for me, they assumed that all of those people believed that Republicans were going to do better on inflation and the economy when they had zero plans to do it. And the other thing is that Civics, I will also say Civics did a very good job of polling this. There were a few other pollsters too that did a better job, did a good job, a little bit more. They were a little bit more circumspect, and they kind of delved in a little bit. But Civics went ahead and polled, top issues and gave people a chance to do top issues. And I went back to this piece several times because I wrote on it. And what was clear is that even though abortion wasn't the top issue for everyone, abortion was the top issue for Democratic voters at 53%. And then of course, Republicans, their top issue by far was the economy. Independents were a little bit more in the economy. But also among the top 4 issues, it was the economy, it was democracy, and it was, democracy and sanctity of the vote. And then it was immigration and abortion, not necessarily in that order. And the second issue top issue among all of those was democracy. And everybody was like, oh no, democracy's not on the ballot. That's not a big deal. Everybody completely misread this. They misread how motivating this would be to the Democratic base. They poo-pooed that. Guess what? Voters had other ideas other than what the media narrative was about the red wave. And they basically swept, the voters went to the polls and they wrote the history. I mean, the reporters just forgot this year that they don't write the history. The voters write the history. And then that's the narrative that the journalists follow, not lead.
Oh, I mean, the journalists were transcribing the Republican narrative, and it's okay for Republicans to argue that they're going to win a wave election. That's sort of the party's job is to project confidence and strength and say, yeah, like this is our time, and people are not happy with Joe Biden. But for the media to say like, all right, we're jumping in bed with those guys, that sounds good. Like this is good. And even though our data and our polls and the special election results show different numbers, we're still going to cling to this because Republicans sure look confident about it, and they're spending money in Washington and Colorado, 2 states, by the way, that Democrats won by 20 points. So this but it was money well spent, right? Because the media swallow that hook, line, and sinker.
Hey, Marcos, don't you know that Democrats are worried about Washington and Senator Patty Murray there? She's really going to get swept up in the red wave. I mean, that was another one. They were like, oh yeah, if Democrats are worried about Patty Murray, then it's curtains for them. Well, we weren't worried about Patty Murray. No one was worried about Patty Murray.
No, we weren't. I think last I saw, she was up at like 16 or 18. I mean, Patty Murray was going to be fine. But you know what, Carrie, you know, I like that you brought up the civics polling on abortion and inflation, and that you said that there was this assumption that inflation benefited Republicans, that this was their issue. And so if people were going to vote on inflation, that they would vote Republican. There was exit polling on this. We don't have to even guess at this. The exit polls, and unfortunately, they did not ask about democracy, which was a big failing by the media consortium. But they did ask about abortion, crime, immigration, and inflation. And inflation was nationally, it was the top issue, but only like 32%. Abortion was 28%. But if you sort of dig in and if you say, okay, of those who said that inflation was the top issue, which party is better on inflation? The numbers were 52% Republican, 44% Democrat. That's just an 8-point spread on the issue that was supposedly like going to sweep out Democrats. So that right there shows you that Republicans never closed that deal. They may have gotten people agitated about inflation and about gas prices, but they didn't, because there was never a plan. They never said, and we'll stop it because, we'll do X, Y, Z, because there's nothing, right? There's literally nothing they can do to slow down inflation. This is a global phenomenon based on the war in Ukraine and COVID and supply chains that have been disrupted and et cetera, et cetera. So this was not the winner, but then you had abortion was number 2. And then even immigration, I think, was top issue for 12%. And okay, that must really benefit Republicans. When they dug into that immigration question, 60% of respondents said that immigrants were a net positive for America, and only 30% said that they hurt America. So even this assumption that the media makes that immigration and inflation helped the Republicans turned out to be a complete mirage. At best, it was a wash. And abortion, of course, definitely benefited us. And 60% of voters said they were pissed off at the Supreme Court and the Dobbs decision, and only like 28% approved of it.
Yeah, I want to throw in one more thing, which is, remember how crime was the big issue? Crime was going to be everything, so New York, the New York gubernatorial race was quote unquote a toss up in the New York Times because crime was going to bring incumbent Governor Kathy Hochul down. Well, that didn't exactly pan out either. Crime was not a super big driver, even though I read story after story where crime was turning it all around for the Republicans. I want to give a couple shout outs here. First of all, I want to shout out one of my favorite people, Joe Sudbay, is apparently listening, according to my producer. So I just want to say Joe Sudbay was among the people who was like, I do not get what is going on with the media. He was, along with Marcos and I, and other people like Simon,
Like
who really
Simon.
Simon Rosenberg and Joe Trippi, and Simon really took, I have to say, took people on his back and was like, I'm just going to put my neck on the line for this, and just was relentless. And it's impressive because it's worth having. I mean, having studied the LGBTQ movement, covering it for 10 years, one of the biggest heroes in it, or one of it, there are many heroes in it, but Harvey Milk was a big hero. And one of his, most famous quotes was a saying, you always have to give them hope. You have to give them hope. And, I don't know, was Simon selling hopium? He didn't think so. He thought, he was basing everything he said on data that he was gleaning on trends, trends that he was seeing on campaigns he's worked. So he didn't think he was helping. He was giving hopium. But even if he was, God bless him for what he did. I'll say that. Another thing, the young voters who went out and showed up in historic numbers. I don't even know what those numbers are.
We don't know yet. Yeah, we don't know yet. But we have some anecdotal.
We have anecdotal, and what we do know is Democrats would never be in the position they are in right now if young voters hadn't showed up at the polls. We needed, all the data suggested, we needed young voters, or we were going to lose this badly. And the fact that we didn't lose this badly, the fact that we're very much in the hunt, that we look to be keeping the Senate, that we have an outside chance at the House, that we won these governorships, that we turned back a handful of, anti-abortion measures, all this stuff, that reproductive freedom and freedom in general really won on the ballot last night. That is in large part, and we're going to find out more about this story, I'm sure, with hard numbers to come, but that is in large part due to young voters, young energy, in particular, young women who were like, I am not going to sit back and let a bunch of men on the Supreme Court tell me what I can and can't do with my body, with my medical choices, with my family, with my partner for the rest of my life. Just F you to that. So you guys had a chance. I mean, young voters, the kids, as they say. I hate to admit I'm not one of the kids anymore, but
Nope.
but they had a chance to make their voice heard, and they did. And they are the hero of their own story. Those votes counted. They made a difference. They will make a material difference to those kids as they grow up in as we go, do the generational work of trying to save this democracy from where it was headed under Donald Trump and MAGA Republicans. And it is the work of a generation. I just want to say this isn't the work of a few cycles. For so long, we were like, if we can just oust Donald Trump, we'll be fine. No, it's the work of a generation. This is a marathon and not a sprint. So just get used to it. And I'm not preaching to the young folks now. I'm preaching that to the old fogies among us. I don't know. I'm not an old fogey, but whatever.
Yeah. So, Carrie's today's first time voters are going to be our regular voters in 2024 and moving forward. And so we don't have to start from lower. We actually have a higher baseline of core Democratic voters. And then so it makes it much easier in 2024. We know if we can turn them out in this kind of cycle in the midterms without a presidential election to drive all the attention, we got things coming. And Carrie, the Supreme Court ain't stopping. This Supreme Court's out of control. They picked up some pretty radical cases, and so they're going to get rid of affirmative action. They are inevitably going to take. They're going to be looking at contraception. I mean, they've got an agenda, and so it is our responsibility right now to keep that in the keep talking about those things. Make sure people realize what these dangers are, because we didn't get the 52 seat majority we needed to make Manchin and Sinema irrelevant. So we're still working with sort of a hand, like our hands tied behind our backs, and it's a challenge. But we don't have to deal with Mitch McConnell's Senate likely, and that alone is huge. We can get judges through, and so that's going to be big for that long term. So Carrie, I'm going to talk a little bit about what I wrote about. So
yes.
I loved your takeaway was sort of on this media narrative that bought into Republican claims of a wave election, and this wave election didn't materialize. And just like we said, and we never said there will be no wave election. I just want to make very clear. What we said and what Simon Rosenberg and what Joe Trippi and everybody else was saying is we don't see evidence of a wave election. So there was a chance that they may have been right by accident. But had there been a wave election, it would have been because of their, because they were right, but because they, even a stop clock is right twice a day. So this is sort of related to what I was writing about. So you got this narrative, it's saying, oh, doom, doom, doom for Democrats, Republicans are going to win. And there was this group of freaking Democrats who bought into it. And for the last several weeks have been the Democrats should have done this, and we're headed towards big losses. And John Fetterman, he shouldn't have debated. And there was always this assumption that the narrative was true, and so it furthered the narrative because then those reporters can say like, even Democrats say that they're in trouble. So we don't have to assume it's just Republicans. Everybody, it's a bipartisan understanding. And again, there's a way to talk about this saying, and you alluded to it earlier. There's a way to say, yeah, we have headwinds. We have economic headwinds. Joe Biden, it's not popular. We're not going to pretend otherwise. We're not going to make up a reality. We get that. But there's also these countervailing issues that may cancel that out and give us an atypical midterm election. Donald Trump not getting off the stage, and the abortion decision, and gun shootings. Guns actually may have played a role as well. And so that was a problem. But then on top of that, these people decided that they knew better what the Democratic message should have been. And had only the Democrats listened to them, then they wouldn't be, they wouldn't lose in a wave election. Again, there had been no wave election yet. No votes had been counted. Some votes had been cast, but nobody knew what those really looked like. And actually, for what we did know about the early votes, they looked pretty good for us. So this idea that the wrong message. So you had people like Hillary Rosen, who's his sort of political consultant, I guess very centrist, saying on CNN, saying we're headed for big election losses, and it's because Joe Biden wants to talk about democracy, and the voters are saying it's about the economy, and he doesn't even want to listen to the voters.
Yeah, it was
terrible.
I was like,
so bad.
I actually knew Hillary Rosen in DC, and because she's openly gay, and I basically knew everyone who was LGBTQ in DC. That's just what it comes down to. And I didn't know her well, but I certainly crossed paths with her any number of times. And I just was shocked. I was shocked when I saw that clip. I just don't know how it benefits anyone to go on the night before, like 2 days before one of the biggest midterm votes in our history, and trash trash Democratic
Party,
the party,
the president,
the messaging, just everything. Like I was like, what is this serving? Not to mention that I thought it was misguided. I thought she was wrong, and
she was wrong.
Yeah.
Yes, objectively, but it's that certainty, right? I know better than everybody else, and I'm not somebody who's going to defend the party when they screw up. We know, like we will be just as vicious, but when the data and the special elections that were run on abortion and the Kansas results on the anti-abortion ballot initiative, when you look at the preponderance of the evidence, we were saying, yeah, abortion is the issue to run on. And when we talk about democracy, Joe Biden talking about democracy, that's Donald Trump. I mean, when I say Donald Trump didn't get off the stage, Donald Trump and democracy are literally the same issue. And you can throw in January 6th Commission in there too, right? It's all of a piece. It's the damage and the danger of the MAGA Republican right. And my quibble with Joe Biden is he keeps talking about MAGA Republicans as though they're different than regular Republicans. And we know that at this point, they're one and the same. There's no distinction. But that's just a tiny little quibble, right? It was clear. And again, we've been talking about this since last year, Carrie. Donald Trump and abortion were going to be the issues. But here's Hillary Rosen. She knows better. And not only was she wrong just by the data, but just even from a strategic standpoint, from a tactical standpoint, Republicans are trying to make this election about the economy. We know that even though in those exit polls, Democrats only had a 52-44 advantage on the economy, that's still an advantage. That is their territory. We have issues that right now trump the economy. Why would we go into their playing field and argue with them over inflation and gas prices when we can just focus on the things that benefit us right now? Just from a tactical standpoint, it made more sense for us to focus on our issues because they were so powerful. They were so overwhelmingly powerful that people were like, I don't care about gas prices. Yeah, these suck. I don't like higher gas prices. They're the worst. But I actually like my autonomy, my bodily autonomy, and I like my democracy, and that's more important today.
There was just, I mean, the other thing is that it was just so clear that the thing that shifted the fundamental trajectory of this election was the Supreme Court ruling. I mean, that's where all the registrations shot up among women. That's where, that's where the special elections turned around from Dems underperforming to Dems overperforming. I mean, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to be like, gee, what changed here?
No, I mean, we're not that smart.
It was right. I know, it was so obvious. I'm not like some sort of genius, right? I'm like, strictly average intelligence over here. It was very, very clear. And so I don't know why you would, I mean, I just want to say, and then I'll let you go back because I know you're on a roll here, but I think the White House and I think Democrats for a long time were all rowing in the same direction on abortion. And it was good. It was good that they did that because that was the base motivator. And we wouldn't have had an effing chance without the base. We would not have. It was super big for young people. It was super big for the base. So you have to pound that home. And then the White House did, I think, a pretty good job. And also some other messengers, some Democratic messengers did a pretty good job of pounding home things at the end, like democracy and like the fact that Republicans have no economic message or plan other than, we're going to raise taxes, cut Social Security and Medicare. I mean, they did a good job of sort of tacking this. Yeah, right. Tacking this on at the end, not as the main message, but hey, you're worried about the economy? Let me give you another reason to vote Democratic and vote against the Republican Party. Hey, you're worried about democracy? Let me give you another reason to vote against Republicans. So I think they actually did it just about right, as good as you can in this very confusing environment. Okay, your floor.
No, I mean this idea that Democrats won't talk about the economy was just patently false too. And by Hillary Rosen going on CNN saying Democrats aren't talking about the economy, then people are like, oh, I guess Democrats aren't talking about the economy. Instead of being like, no, they're talking about Social Security. They're talking about, heck, the choice to have a child is probably the most consequential economic decision anybody can make. Kids are expensive, as you know, and I know. Kids are expensive. Not having kids, you're going to have a lot more money, a lot more financial stability. They don't add to the bottom line.
Not near as many headaches and way too much sleep. So who would want that?
Right. So even there, they are undermining the Democratic economic message by saying, well, they don't have no message. So that was sort of like on the right. But then I'm also going to call out our allies on the left. Because again, you have people like Bernie Sanders and Justice Democrats. And I know mentioning Bernie Sanders is going to upset our producer, Walter. Sorry, Walter.
Actually, Marcos, I'm just going to go get myself a sip of water real quick. And you go after Bernie. No, I'm just kidding.
But they were a week before the election. They're talking about how Democrats are going to lose big. And it's because they didn't talk about economics. And so I just want to make a very clear distinction here. I mentioned earlier tactical decision for this cycle as opposed to strategic. Tactical is what you do to win an immediate task at hand, like the immediate battle. In this case, the midterm election. But the midterm election isn't the end of this fight. There's a strategic fight for the future of our country, right? And it's going to continue forward. And that strategic battle does need a Democratic Party that talks about economics better. Absolutely. We have seen right now in the last couple months how the cost of gas is directly correlated to Joe Biden's approval numbers. So if you're a big oil executive in 2024 and you want the Republicans to win because they're going to give you sweet ass tax breaks and no regulations, what are you going to do? You're going to manipulate the price of gas right before the election to drive his approval ratings down and to help, to try to help the Republican win that election. That is incredibly dangerous. Why aren't we demonizing oil companies for price gouging and taking advantage of quote inflation to lead to record corporate profits? If it was inflation, obviously their profits would be stable because it just means the cost of labor, goods, and everything else would go up, but it hasn't. Record profits. We need to have a better economic message. We need to be better at demonizing those malignant economic actors. Yes, so I am with Bernie Sanders and the economic left on those issues, but that's the strategic battle. And you don't fight the strategic battle a week before the election when you're tactically focused on the task at hand. And as we mentioned earlier, that tactical strategy was abortion, Donald Trump / democracy. That's what moved the numbers. And to add to how we're such geniuses, Carrie, in the special elections before the Dobbs decision, Republicans were outperforming their 2020 numbers by 6 to 9 points. After Dobbs, Democrats were outperforming their 2020 numbers by about between 3 and 7 points. That's like a 10 to 20 point shift because of the Dobbs decision. You do not have to be a rocket scientist to go, wow, maybe that Supreme Court decision did something and it dramatically altered the shape of this electorate, and let's ride that. And for once, the Democratic Party got that right. For once, they don't always get it right. They got it right this time. And so if you wanted to have that discussion about the party's failings on their economic messaging, yeah, that's a legit question, and we can talk about that. But could you wait a freaking week till after the election instead of saying like we're gonna lose and we're gonna lose big, and it's because they didn't follow my agenda and talk about my issues? That's what was so infuriating.
The guys that because I listen to a bunch of podcasts to see what other people are doing all the time, and the guys at Pod Save America are always talking about how Democrats need to develop an inner monologue, right? So like, just you don't have to go to a reporter and say,
"Oh my God,
we'll lose! Oh, the leadership is screwing up! Oh, whatever." Like, you could do that behind closed doors. You don't have to tell a reporter. You know what I mean? Like. So, and I'm a reporter. Like, there are things that I think it's worth telling reporters. There's transparency that I think is worthwhile. And, transparency a week before election when there's no chance. Here's the thing. If you really believed this and you really wanted to make a case for this and you wanted to send up a signal in the press because you couldn't get people to listen to you, so you fueled a story, I don't know, 2 months out, to see if you could get people to buy into whatever you thought was the really right tactical choice or even strategic choice, right? Then maybe there's a way you can defend that and make a case for it. What you can't make a case for is doing it like 5 days, 2 days, 1 day before everyone's going to vote. Nothing can change at that time. You can't change it. You can't get more buy-in into your position. All you're going to do is deflate and demoralize Democratic voters. Like, that's the only thing you're doing. That's it.
The media will go, oh, look, the party's left. They think they're going to lose as well. And so it feels their narrative. I would say the narrative, and I capitalize the letters T and N, the narrative. Because it's not just Republicans pushing it at that point. So they're even safer in pushing that. So absolutely. And what's wrong with waiting a week? I mean, if we got blown out, then come back and say like, that didn't work. But maybe wait to see what the exit polls say. Because the exit polls turns out abortion was top 2 nationally. And we didn't mention this, #1 issue in Pennsylvania. And in Pennsylvania, we won the governor's race, we won the senator's race, and we picked up the state house as well. We picked up a state legislature in Pennsylvania because that was what people wanted. Turns out they wanted to talk about abortion.
Just imagine how well we could have done in Pennsylvania if John Fetterman hadn't done that debate, Marcos. Just kidding. Like that was another media fail. The media. Can I just say I'll just take one victory lap on this. The media was convinced it was a disaster, and I have to say it was hard to watch John Fetterman.
It was hard to watch.
He was not at his best, right? But the media decided that this was going to be a disaster for him without talking to voters, without seeing polling and whatever. And what became really clear, I kept looking at Civics favorable. Some of this stuff is just not public. You can't look at it public consumption. But I kept looking at and also looking at other polling, and it was really clear that the media missed the story entirely. And even the day I saw Sarah Longwell, who is a friend of mine from DC. She's never Trumper. She's
been on the show a couple times.
Yeah, she's openly gay, which is how I knew her in DC, because we all knew each other. We were all on the list. Anyway, but she's been on the show a couple times. Hopefully, we'll do a postmortem with her about where the Republican Party is. Oh God. She said, I'm watching this, and she does all these. She does all of these focus groups all the time. And she's like, I'm watching this debate between Fetterman and Oz. And I saw her tweet this. And she said, sure, Fetterman is struggling. It's clear he's having trouble, and that the stroke has had an impact. He said, but Oz doesn't seem to be doing himself any favors. He's talking fast. He's smug. He's just basically, I'm using this now. He's like as gross as he ever was. Like once a snake oil salesman, always a snake oil salesman. And I wrote a piece that said the question isn't whether or not the debate hurt Fetterman. It's whether or not Oz can get past his ick factor. And based on the fact that Oz's unfavorable rating were sky high, while Fetterman was actually looking pretty good. I mean, he was like his unfavorable rating and favorable rating were almost exactly tied at 47-48%. And meanwhile, Fetterman was, Oz was like, about at least 15, maybe even 20 points underwater. So that proved to be exactly right. It wasn't my idea. I just looked into what I saw Sarah saying, and I was like, you know what? She's got this right.
This is where data becomes very, very important, as opposed to sort of preconceived notions of what your gut is telling you. Because a lot of Democrats are freaking out because it was painful watching Fetterman, but there was a narrative brewed, and it was organic. It didn't come from the campaign. People are saying like that was really brave. That was really brave, given what he's gone through. He could have hidden, and yet he went out there, and that's pretty impressive. But here's where the data comes in. The data showed very clearly, and Republicans, I'm sure, polled this to death, and he knew that Oz's big problems with voters is that he was seen as a carpetbagger because he's from New Jersey and he lives in New Jersey and his doctor's in New Jersey, and that the snake oil like sleaziness, right? So the way Fetterman may have struggled, but people knew why he was struggling. Oz had to come out and show that he wasn't a sleazy snake oil salesman, and he had to show that he cared about or knew something about Pennsylvania, that he wasn't just a carpetbagger. But instead, he sat there and he threw dagger after dagger at Fetterman, spoke too fast so Fetterman couldn't understand because his ability to listen and process is currently impaired, and smirked and thought he was being all clever, and then lied in a way that Fetterman just couldn't keep up to rebut. So he actually played into his worst criticisms about that. But you're a Democrat, you're watching this. We all knew what those problems Oz had, right? So it would have been easy to go like, yeah, Fetterman struggled. He's really brave, but look, Oz didn't do what he needed to do, right, which was X, Y, Z. Instead, they're all crying and whining and, oh, why did Fetterman go out there? And, oh, this is a disaster and we're going to lose. This is the moment we lost a race. And so you don't generally get that from Republicans. And there's a line between like lying and being honest and not being, just hysterical about reactions and using the press as your therapist.
Yeah.
Oh, like, let me get out my angst about what's happening.
Exactly. That's where the inner monologue comes in.
Exactly.
Go get therapy. Go see someone about that, but don't go to a reporter and like spill your guts. So anyway,
I hope we've learned some things this cycle. I think we've learned the power of base mobilization, focusing a message that really focuses on getting our vote out. There's not a lot of persuadable people, and there's also work that can be done there, on abortion, on those college-educated suburban white women and even white men.
Our ground game was just superior, and having everybody come out and early vote. If you
early vote was huge.
If you got a young person to vote, if you got your family members to vote, if you got anyone to vote who wasn't going to, consider yourself a hero, right? Because that all mattered. And if you're an organizer, an activist, if you got out the vote, if you texted, if you called, if you wrote postcards, consider yourself a hero. If you voted, consider yourself a hero.
Absolutely. So we have shown that even in the worst environment, we can win. So 2024 is it's a different world now. It's going to be tough. It's going to be like this year. But if we can win in a year like this, we can win in 2024. We can win in January when we have the runoff in Georgia for Raphael Warnock's Senate race. And so we're not done. I think we get to take a week or two to like relax and celebrate and feel good about what we've accomplished, and that's well earned. But this is, again, just a strategic battle. We won this tactical battle, yay us! But now we get the strategic war that we're still fighting, and so I'm really excited to have you, Carrie, and everybody at Daily Kos, and everybody that listens and watches and reads as part of that fight, because now we have shown that we are far more powerful than anybody thought possible. Nobody believed that the Democrats could survive this election, yet we did it against all odds, and we can do it even more. We can build upon that. So I'm really excited about the future and about what we are going to accomplish in the years ahead, despite dealing with Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis and all the crap that they're going to throw at the Supreme Court.
Who are getting ready to claw each other's eyes out, by the way. It was a really bad night for Donald Trump and a really good night for Ron DeSantis, and that could be interesting. So go ahead. So
thanks, everybody, for joining us for this episode. I am so glad that it was a fun episode, because it could have been a lot different. But we got to say we're right and to celebrate some great victories and to really set the table for this fight and how it's going to shape up in the years ahead. So I'm glad we're all part of that.
But mostly to thank you for doing what you did, because you guys did this. Absolutely.
So thanks to you, Carrie and Walter, our producer, and everybody who makes the show work behind the scenes, Kara, Dorothy, and Paul. And thank you for everything. Seriously, love you so much from the bottom of my heart. You guys are the best. And let's keep doing more of this. Winning is fun. Let's like this. How this feels? Let's do more of this. Yeah. Thank you so much. Catch you all next week.